Welcome to another edition of the Headless Hammerhead Guide to Comic Books. So, you've just spent some time at your local comic shop. You've really enjoyed your time there, had some fun playing with the toys that they have on display, took some great pictures, and found the one comic book that you know is going to be the best read you've had in decades. You read it and you tell yourself, this was fantastic. I know that this is going to be a big hit, and I want to pass it down to my kids because it will be worth something one day. So what do? Do you just throw it on the shelf with your other books? Let's discuss. So I present you with 3 different ways that your book can come when you get it at a local shop. We'll discuss each one individually, and we'll start with the raw book, completely raw, not bagged and boarded. So the first thing you want to do when you get home is inspect the book. A lot of people don't like the reflected light, but actually it helps you to see very minor flaws that your naked eye wouldn't normally see. So you want to shine it under a nice bright light, and the reflection can actually help identify minor flaws like dings and dents, and even crunches on the corners like this. You also want to look through very quickly through the inside pages, see if anything seems missing or chewed up or anything like that. So then you get a brand new bag and board. Do not ever reuse a board. You'll see why in a minute. But the board, you'll see, has a dull side and a shiny side. The shiny side can reflect light. You can see it here a little bit. It's kind of hard to see on the camera, but you can see it right there. The shiny side is actually a side that's treated with a substance that prevents acid from coming onto the book, which can damage the book over time. And you'll see again why that's important in just a moment. The bag will have a flap usually that's used to seal the bag once your comic is inside. You can see here that the flap overhangs and your bag is open. So you take the board, you want to flip it so that the shiny side is on the side of the flap of the bag, and this is important for a reason. So the shiny side is now facing where the flap is, and there's the flap. And what you will do is take your comic very carefully, and you want to insert it on the side that is shiny. You generally want to insert it with that corner first, the open corner, and you want to keep the board slightly outside of the bag before you place the comic inside. This is important because a lot of times you don't notice how you're inserting the comic into the bag, and you can end up damaging the comic without even realizing until years later. So if you take the comic, for example this one here, and you try to stick it in while the bag is fully inserted into the bag, you'll struggle. You might be able to crunch the corner if you're not careful. You see how it's sometimes a little bit more difficult to insert it here. And another thing that can happen is you get the comic book inserted into the bag and everything looks fine. But years later, when you take the comic book back out of the bag, you notice something that you hadn't noticed when you put it in. That corner is very dangerous to put into the bag because you will never know. I've had this happen so many times with books. That corner comes out crunched. You've sold the book, or you want to send it to be graded, and suddenly you've got a bend that is permanent and cannot be pressed because it's been squeezed in there for so long, so many years, and pressure has been applied, so it's made it a fold instead of just a crease. So once you've got your comic inside of the bag, then you can seal it, and we'll show you in a moment how to do that properly and put it away in a short box, long box, or on a shelf, depending how you want to do. The other thing that you might see is the comic comes already bagged and boarded. You always want to take the comic out of that bag and board and put it in a new one, and this is why. This comic was placed in the bag the wrong way. The board is backwards, so they've placed the dull side into the pressing against the comic book, and what happens is you can see the shiny side is clean, but the dull side has some acid that has been seeped out and from the comic book itself, and it's now printed onto the bag, and that will transfer to the comic and over years damage it. So you want to be very, very careful. You then take your comic, put it in a brand new bag and board, and you will avoid that danger as long as you package it correctly with the shiny side against the comic. The other way a comic may come is polybagged. So a polybag is a little dangerous too, because opening a polybag can be tricky. These are made to prevent somebody from opening the comic and checking out the inside for one reason or another. We discussed that in a previous video with the dictionary. So they're difficult to tear open, and you can damage the book if you're not careful when ripping it open. If you try to pull it open, look at what happens to the comic book. It gets crunched in all different ways. Even if you tear, say, the corner, you can end up ripping the comic. You can try to be as careful as you want, but it's not going to happen. Look at this. It just doesn't happen. You got to tear it open and damage your book anyway. So the best way is obviously with scissors. Very carefully, make sure the comic is all the way at either the top or the bottom, and then cut on the opposite side. Very, very carefully across the top. Now, okay, maybe you don't own scissors for whatever crazy reason. You don't have a pair of scissors to do it. So you can take a blade. Make sure you're extremely careful when you do this stuff. You lay the book flat. Do not do this while standing up and holding it up, because you will damage the book. Lay it flat, and as carefully as you can, go ahead and run it across along the seam, and that should do it. And once that's complete, then you can usually pull it out safely. You can tear the corners a little bit, maybe widen the opening a little bit if you need to, but very careful. As you see there, you could bend the book if you're not extremely careful opening this. This is another reason why it's important to not send in a polybagged book to CGC. They are not careful when they open your book, and they will damage it. And even a book that may be a 9.8 will come back a lower grade, because they are not careful when they open your polybag. They do not like receiving a polybagged book, and having the polybag will not improve your grade in any way. So as you can see with this one, once you open it, you want to inspect it. This one has a crunch on the top corner there, top spine corner. We do check it. This one's supposed to have a digital code, so we check to make sure that that's there. If it's not, that could be a plus, because if it wasn't printed with the code and it is supposed to, that can get you more money when you sell the book. But if you're expecting the digital code, that's a disappointment, and you may be able to go back to your shop and let them know, hey, this was printed without the code. They may exchange it for you. Fingers crossed. So you take the book, you bag and board it the correct way. Again, the board sticking out just a little bit so that you can safely insert that book into the bag and board, and you're all set. Now let's look at why it is important to take the book out of a polybag before you bag and board it and store it for years. This book was stored in its polybag when I bought it. Who knows how many years it sat in this polybag, and when I took it out, the bag was brittle and it fell apart. The bag pretty much stayed in the regular bag and board. You can see it there, it's complete, but when you shake it out, it comes out in pieces because it's so brittle. You see the little chunks falling out there, and if you hold it, it crumbles right in your hand. This is not something that you want to keep your comic book stored in, because it's going to damage your book over time. So you're going to get a brand new bag and board, take it out of the poly bag and board it, and then you can store it. So once you do have your comic book in a bag and board, you want to tape it closed if it's not a resealable. Resealable already has glue on the bag itself so that you can just peel off the backing and stick it on. You'll see it in just a moment. But when you tape it, you don't want to put a piece of tape right in the middle. Most people do this, and what it does is it creates what are called dog ears. So you see here, your bag has the folds on the corners, and when you store your comic, if it's got dog ears, whatever comic you put behind it could get an indentation from those dog ears on the front cover, damaging that book. So it won't damage this book, but it'll damage the one behind it, and that's not fair to the other book. So what you want to do instead, take 2 pieces of tape. It doesn't take that much more time. You flip your bag and board over. Do not do it holding the bag and board, because you will drop that bag and board and you will destroy the corner and your book is damaged. Flat on a table, put the 2 pieces of tape And now you've got a nicely sealed, bagged, and boarded book that will not have dog ears, so it will keep to itself and it won't damage your other books. So another thing to know is if you use really good quality tape on the bag, it can rip a hole in the bag, or it can just crunch the bag, or just create a lot of problems. Good quality tape sticks real good, and you see the mess that it can make if you need to take the comic out for whatever reason. You want to reread it, inspect it for submitting, whatever it can be. But tape can stay stuck on the bag, and then trying to take it off, you end up scratching the bag, and that's bad for the comic itself or for the comics behind it when you store it, things like that. So they do offer another option, which is the resealable bag. So you see the resealable bag has a strip of glue covered there by a piece of plastic. It could either have it on the flap or below the flap down here. But you take this piece of plastic covering off, which is really annoying though, because it's got a lot of static electricity, and you see it sticks to everything. Sometimes it stays stuck to your hand and you shake it and it won't come off. It's really annoying. So damn cursed things. But once it's off, then you can just close the flap and it stays sealed all the way across, and you don't get dog ears. And you can reopen it, take the comic out, and then reseal it just fine, and then put your comic away. So this is a good option if you're going to be opening your bags and boards quite often. A lot of people don't like them because when you take the comic out, it could stick to the comic and maybe damage it. And we'll talk about that in a future video. So that does it for another edition of the Headless Hammerhead Guide to Comic Book Collecting. So please, in the comments below, let me know what you think. Do you think that you learned something useful from this video? Have you heard of a different way of doing this, of storing and packaging your comic books, etc.? Or do you do something different that you think might be a better way to do it? Also, please email me if you want to ask me a personal question or something that you don't want posted on the general chat. My email address is headlesshammerhead@gmail.com. Also, make sure you like and subscribe. Make sure you hit the notification bell so that you can receive notices when I post a new video. I try to do useful content for new collectors and new people to the hobby, so you may find a lot of this information useful, especially if you're new to the hobby or if you know somebody who's trying to get into the hobby. Also, make sure to check out my website, which is my online comic book store, which is dangerouswaterscomics.com. There's a lot of S's in there. dangerouswaterscomics.com, where you can find a lot of back issue comics, new releases, pre-orders. You find some toys and games and trade paperbacks, etc., and some even random items that you might be interested in. They're related to comics and pop culture as well. If you use code FIRST, F-I-R-S-T, during checkout, if it's your first time purchasing, then you will get a 20% discount on your purchase as well, even on sale items, which is a great thing. Watch the video again if you need to. Review my past videos. There's a lot of information that you may not be able to retain after just one view. Share the video with friends and family or anybody interested in getting in the hobby. And stay cool. Make sure you keep reading, keep collecting. And remember,
we don't bite here.